What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another Thing This Football video. And this will be going over my top 5 sell high targets, or players that I'm looking to sell high on, capitalize on some recently productive performances, and try and get maximum value out of these players. There's 5 players that I'll talk about here, and then I'm going to go over a list of players that I'd be looking to either trade away based off of their playoff schedule or trade away off of their upcoming schedule. It's just going to be sort of roster dependent because obviously we're getting to that point in fantasy football season where you know what your team needs to do in terms of wins and losses. If you're 7-2, 6-3, you're probably just trying to get poised for the playoffs, make sure that you have the best team possible for then. So then you're looking to trade away players with really bad playoff matchups. And if you're 3-6, 2-7, and you really need to win out to make the playoffs, then you're looking towards really just taking things week by week. You want to make sure you can put the best roster you can on the field every single week. So it's really important to take into account what those upcoming matchups are going to be. So as always, if you guys have any specific trade questions, I'd love helping you guys out with that. So just let me know in the comments. Give me as much context as possible. It helps me get you guys as set as possible, give you guys the best advice I can. But one of my favorite things to do is help you guys get those trades set up. Going through and making these videos as well is certainly how I sort of navigate making trades in my own leagues as well. A lot of these players that I talk about are players that I'm either targeting or looking to trade away in my own leagues. They're players, and generally, this is just generally advice that I implement on my own. So I'm definitely putting my money where my mouth is as well. As well, today you guys should get a buy low video. I will have gone over, I believe, 8 or 9 players that I'm looking to buy low on, along with a similar list in terms of players that I've been looking to buy low or buy, depending on what my record is. So make sure you guys watch that video as well. It should help you guys be as set up and as informed as possible for making trades this week as you can. If you want to make sure you get access to that video, just all you got to do is be subscribed to the channel. That way you can help me help you the rest of the season, help you guys hopefully get some fantasy championships this year. So yeah, with that, let's just get into the first player here. And as always, if you guys have any questions, just let me know in the comments. So I'll start things off with probably the most obvious sell high for me this week. That's going to be Gus Edwards. He only had 5 carries in Week 9. And he scored 2 touchdowns. He had over 70 rushing yards, and he looked really good on that 142-yard rush he had. He's obviously a talented player. He's obviously been really efficient his entire career. But the fact of the matter is, he's got 5 touchdowns over the next 2 weeks. He's got bad matchups the entire rest of the season. Starting with a really tough matchup against the Cleveland Browns this week, so he's probably not even like a player that I'm confident starting in Week 10. And on top of that, Keaton Mitchell looked really great in Week 9. I don't think Keaton Mitchell can really overtake Gus Edwards, and Gus Edwards is obviously always going to have that goal line role in this offense. But I think Keaton Mitchell's got a real shot to sort of make this like a 3 running back backfield between him, Justice Hill, and Gus Edwards. And if that's the case, along with what Lamar offers on the ground, it's just going to be really hard to trust anybody here. So if you can get a weekly starter, get like a solid running back 2 for Gus Edwards, I'd definitely do that. I don't think he's going to be a guy that I'm comfortable or confident starting the rest of the season. Next up, we've got Jakobi Meyers, and I know it's kind of tough to sell high on Jakobi Meyers because he obviously came off of a really bad week 2 weeks ago and didn't do a whole lot in Week 9, but he did have a 17-yard rushing touchdown. He caught 2 passes for 38 yards, so he ended up putting up a respectable fantasy performance. And the fact of the matter is, rookie quarterbacks can very rarely support multiple pass catchers. I know that C.J. Stroud might have a lot of people looking at that as like an outlier, but if you look at the other rookie quarterbacks in the NFL, we've got Bryce Young, who's obviously not supporting many pass catchers. It's just really tough for a rookie quarterback to come in and support multiple pass catchers in an offense. I think it's a safe bet to make that Davante Adams ends up leading the team in targets going forward. If you're going to bet on a Raiders pass catcher, it's going to be Davante Adams going forward. So these just going to be really tough, especially in this offense in Oakland or Las Vegas that really does want to run the ball. They want to get Josh Jacobs involved. And I think that we're not going to see as much volume, not as much passing volume in this offense. And the passing volume that does come is generally going to go towards Davante Adams. So I think if you can get wide receiver 2 or 3, like so that borderline like top 25 wide receiver value for Jakobi Meyers, it makes a lot of sense to do that because I don't see him as like a reliable weekly starter going forward. I think you can still high on this performance. Say, hey, look, he had a good game with Aiden O'Connell. Sell them on that fact that maybe Aiden O'Connell isn't going to be a downgrade for him. But I just think we're going to see a lot less passing volume in the offense in general, and Davante Adams is obviously going to get more involved. So I don't think I can trust Jakobi Meyers too much going forward. And if you can get a reliable starter for him, I would do that. Next up, we got Raheem Mostert. This one's tough, obviously, but Mostert is entering his bye in the Week 10, and then Devon Achan's going to return in Week 11. So I think Achan likely operates as the lead back in this offense. He's just been very clearly the most explosive running back in this backfield. It's going to be really tough if you're Mike McDaniel to keep Achan off the field. That's going to make Mostert the 1B in an offense. It's actually been slowing down of late. They only put up 14 points this last week. They've kind of been held in check against every single good team they've played so far, and they actually have a really tough schedule down the stretch. They have a matchup against the Jets coming up. There's just some really tough defenses they're going to play going forward here, and it's going to be really tough for this offense to keep performing at the level that it's been doing so far. So I think we're going to see this offense slow down a little bit in general. Devon Achan likely comes in and makes this effectively makes Mostert the backup running back in this offense. Obviously, they'll both be utilized, they'll both be involved in the offense. But if you can get that running back one value for Mostert because of what he's done so far, I think it just definitely makes a lot of sense to do that. Mostert continues to bail himself out with touchdowns. He's scored like 9 or 10 touchdowns already on the season. He's not involved as a pass catcher over the last couple of weeks. I believe he has 0 receptions in each of the last 2 games. If you can get that high end value for Mostert, I think now is a good time to do that because his peak value is probably already here, and I don't think we're going to see that high end production going forward. Next up, we've got Brian Robinson Jr., who I do like as a player. I think he's actually looked a lot better this season than what he did last season. But the fact of the matter is, he just continues to score touchdowns at a rate that I don't think he can really continue to do. The Commanders made it very clear at the trade deadline by trading both Montez Sweat and Chase Young that they're not really playing to win games right now. And we know what we've seen so far this season and last season that Brian Robinson is an extremely game script dependent running back. He's a running back that obviously performs a lot better in games where the Commanders are competitive and winning, especially given that he's not effectively involved as a pass catcher in this offense. He's more of their goal line back, first and second down back. And when they're trailing, Brian Robinson's going to leave the field in lieu of Antonio Gibson. I think they're going to be trailing a lot going forward. Obviously, they did win this last week against the New England Patriots, but they're just not a very great team. They're going to lose a lot of games over the back half of the season, and Brian Robinson is not going to be able to get that volume that he's been getting lately. He wasn't very efficient on the volume he was given this last week either. He fumbled as well. Obviously, he's continued to score a lot of touchdowns, and he's had a couple blow-up games, especially early on in the season. So if you look at his whole season, the whole body of work this season, it looks like his production's actually been really solid. I believe he's the running back 12 right now in the season, but I just don't see that being something he can continue to put up. He's not going to score touchdowns at the rate he's been doing. He's obviously just not showing that explosiveness that we saw early on in the season. So if you can get like solid running back 2 value for him, I would definitely look to do that because I think he's definitely past his peak in value, and I just see that trending down the rest of the way here. And then just to bring up a tight end, I'm going to bring up Cole Kmet as well. Obviously, Cole Kmet's a very talented player. He had that really fun touchdown, his first touchdown catch where he basically mossed the guy. It was a really cool catch. He's had a lot of really high quality plays so far this season. He's a good player, and I totally believe that he's going to be a fantasy relevant player at some point over the course of his career. But this just isn't an offense that I think we can rely on making him a reliable weekly starter. Obviously, DJ Moore hasn't performed at a very high level of late. I think he's very clearly going to be the pass catcher they want to utilize. As well as that, Justin Fields is going to come back at some point. We haven't seen this offense be very consistent, so it's just going to be really tough here. On top of that, the schedule's mediocre going forward. Cole Kmet does still have his bye ahead of him as well, so if you can get a weekly starter for Cole Kmet, convince someone that he is like a weekly starting tight end option, because I believe he is the tight end 5 on the season at this point. He's just not someone that I think I would be like confident plugging into my starting lineup every single week. He's more of a streaming option. He's not much better than the guys that you're looking at the waiver wire, looking at those guys like Jake Ferguson, Dalton Schultz. I think they're all in that same tier, and if people believe that Cole Kmet is ahead of those guys, he's definitely worth selling high on right now. So now I wanted to sort of go over a list of players that really just have really brutal playoff schedules, and these are players that I'd be looking to trade away if you've got a really good record. Because if you're at that 7-2, 8-1, 6-3 point, you're at that point where you're really trying to make sure that your roster is as stacked as possible come those fantasy playoffs, and we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position that we've got a really elite roster for each of those 3 weeks. So I'll start things off with Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously, he is on bye this week, so it might be a little bit tough to trade him. But I want to just bring up his playoff schedule. In weeks 15, 16, and 17, they are going to play the New York Jets, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Baltimore Ravens. Those are 3 of arguably the top 5 defenses in the NFL. That actually applies to all of the Miami Dolphin pass catchers and running backs. Just a really brutal schedule there. I don't think the Dolphins are going to be able to put out those like high-end performances over any of those 3 weeks. So if you're relying on those guys to really anchor your roster, if you want to just sort of look around, see what you can get for those guys, I think it makes some level of sense to at least kick the tires on potentially moving them for equal value. Next, I want to bring up Alvin Kamara. The New Orleans Saints have a relatively decent playoff schedule, but in Week 15 they play the New York Giants. That's a plus matchup. In Week 16 they play the Los Angeles Rams, who have actually been pretty good against opposing running backs so far this season. And then in Week 17 they've got a really brutal matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's the one that concerns me. The Buccaneers don't give it up on the ground. You saw Alvin Kamara only have 49% of the snaps for the Saints this last week against the Bears. We're sort of seeing Alvin Kamara trend down, even though he's got some plus matchups coming forward. I think if you can get high-end value for Kamara, it does sort of make sense to kick the tires on that. I actually got Terry McLaurin here, who I want to mention. Along with Jahan Dotson, actually, the Washington Commanders have a really tough playoff schedule coming up. They will play in weeks 15, 16, and 17, the Los Angeles Rams, who are relatively decent against opposing wide receivers. In week 16, they play the New York Jets, who are the worst defense to face if you're a fantasy wide receiver, and then the San Francisco 49ers. So really tough stretch for those 2 guys. I don't see them really putting up any like high-end performances. So if you want to sell high on those guys right now, I think it makes some sense. Garrett Wilson's another one I'll bring up. The New York Jets have a relatively tough playoff schedule as well. They get Miami in Week 15, that's okay. They get Washington in Week 16, which is okay as well. But they play Cleveland in Week 17. That's a really brutal matchup. I don't think Garrett Wilson's going to be a guy that I'll be confident starting in Week 17 at all. I think if you can get like wide receiver 2 value for him, coming off of a decent game as well, I think it makes some sense to do that. And then last, I want to mention Amari Cooper. The Cleveland Browns play the Chicago Bears in Week 15. That's a fine matchup. But then after that, they play Houston and the New York Jets. Houston actually really doesn't give it up to opposing wide receivers. They allow 24% less points on average to opposing wide receivers. And then they play the New York Jets in Week 17. That's an awful matchup. There's no way I'm playing Amari Cooper in that one. So I think if you want to sell high on Amari Cooper there, I think it makes sense because these are guys that are not going to put up high-end numbers in the fantasy playoffs here. And then last, there's a couple of players here that I just wanted to mention that I think you could consider trading away if you've got a bad record. I know these are 3 really good players and players that can be really useful for you down the stretch here, but if you're sitting at 3-6, 2-7, even 4-5, and you just are at that point where you really do need to just kind of win out, string together some wins, these are some guys that really have some tough stretches coming up here. I'll start up with Mark Andrews. They play the Cleveland Browns this week, who gave up very few points to opposing tight ends this season. On top of that, Mark Andrews still has a bye coming up as well. So you're going to have about 2 weeks here over the next month where Mark Andrews isn't going to be super useful for your fantasy team. If you can get high-end value for him, I think it makes some sense if you're a team that needs to win out because he's going to have 2 weeks where he's not really going to contribute for you. Davante Adams, I know it's tough to sell high on him right now because of how brutal he's been, but I just want to bring up the next month. They get the Jets this next week. We've talked about how just awful they are for fantasy wide receivers. You don't really want to be excited about Davante Adams in your lineup this week. They play the Miami Dolphins, who look a lot better on defense right now against opposing wide receivers. Jalen Ramsey's back. He'll lock down Davante Adams potentially in that one. They play the Kansas City Chiefs, who have been really solid on defense. Not a great matchup there. And then Davante Adams has a bye. So over the next month, I think Davante Adams is actually going to continue to struggle. I think he'll be better than what he's been so far, but I think if you can get high-end value for Adams, it just makes a lot of sense to get out of him right now. Then last, we'll just bring up Derrick Henry. They play the Buccaneers and the Jacksonville Jaguars over the next 2 weeks. 2 really negative matchups for opposing running backs. If you can get out of Derrick Henry and get like high-end running back 2, low-end running back 1 value, I think I'd be comfortable doing that and just moving on because I think his next 2 weeks are going to be really tough for Henry. So that'll do it for this week's Sell High video. I went over about 5 or 6 players that I'd be looking to sell high on specifically, and then I touched on some players that I'd be looking to move based off of your records. So as always, if you guys have any specific start or trade questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'd love to help you guys get sorted out there. If you guys have any specific questions about how I'm doing all this research as well, I'm happy to help direct you guys to some resources there. On top of that, today you guys should have gotten a video going over players that I'd be looking to specifically acquire in trades, sort of record dependent and record independent. So make sure you watch that video as well. You can subscribe to the channel to make sure you get access to that. We're at about 930 subscribers right now, and I'd love to hit 1,000 by the end of the NFL season. So if you guys watch all these videos, I know a lot of you guys watch them and haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Just make sure you're subscribed. Make sure that if you haven't already, give me that subscription. It really helps with the channel, helps me out, really helps make sure that you guys don't miss anything as well. And then as always, if you guys did like this video, please do just give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm, helps you know that I'm doing a good job. So really appreciate all the support. Tomorrow morning, you guys will be getting the Thursday Night Football private room where I'll preview the really gross game between the Chicago Bears and Carolina Panthers. The NFL just loves giving us these crappy games on Thursdays. But that being said, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.